Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar, How to Model and Automate a Process in Less than 30 Minutes. My name is Tobias Schroeder and I'm a marketing manager here at SoftExpert. Today's webinar will be presented by Mr. Gus Oliveira. Gus has over 10 years experience in the financial and business development field, working in large companies both in the United States and Brazil. I wish you all a great webinar.
All right, thank you everyone for watching another one of SoftExpert's webinar. Today, we're going to talk about a very specific subject, which is how to model and automate a process in less than 30 minutes using SoftExpert's process modeling tool that is part of our BPM solution. Business Process Management, or BPM, is a much broader concept where we have a few stages, like the ones that you can see here on the screen. And in today's presentations, we're going to be talking about mainly the define and modeling stage, but we're also going to execute and do a little bit of monitoring as well. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start off by modeling the process or drawing the process using BPMN 2.0, which is an international standard for process mapping. The process that I chose to configure today as an example is going to be a travel request process. So here are some of the elements that are going to be mapped and discussed that you see in the example today. To start off, we're going to map some of our activities, which include, the trip request, the approval of the request, reservations, expenses, and so on. Also in our process, we're going to use different types of executioners, such as the process starter, the starter's leader, a travel management department, as well as a financial department. And all these different executioners, they're going to be responsible for different activities or different actions within our process. We'll also use some resources, including the actual process drawing or the process modeling. We use some forms that we're going to design to receive information at each stage of this process. We're also going to use some checklists that can help us, especially in our approval activities. And we're also going to use workflows to execute our process. All right, so let's get started. So the first thing that we have to do is log into our system. So let me input here my username and my password. And the first screen that we see here is our home page. From here, we can see all of the components that make up SoftExpert's Excellence Suite. And for today's example, we're going to go right into our process solution. What you see here now are the main menus to manage our processes. And to register our process, I'm just going to simply click here. Okay, so what you can see here now is that I already have quite a few processes registered, and you can even see the previews for these processes here at our bottom of the page. Now, to add a new process, all I have to do is click here on Add, select our process type. In this case, it's going to be an operational process. Click on Save. And the first screen that we see here is just a screen about my process data. So the first thing we have to do is enter our process ID, which I can either do it manually or click here and select an automatic ID. In our case, I'm going to do it manually. So this is going to be a travel request for 2017 and the process name. Just a quick tip here. Make sure you standardize your process title so later on, when someone else is looking to execute this process, it'll be easy for them to find the process and know exactly what it is. Now, I'll just click up here on Save and Exit, and the solution automatically opens up the process mapping tool. So this here is our blank canvas where we're going to map the entire process. Each one of these lanes, right now we only have one. This is where we're going to group the activities that are going to be performed by either a user, a department, a functional role, and so on. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start by creating a new activity, which is very simple. To create a new activity, I have two options. I can either go here on the left side menu, drag and drop it into my lane, or I can just select here my Start button and choose my activity. As you can see, this activity comes with a default name, but since it's the first activity for our travel request process, I'm going to rename it to Request Travel. Now, after making this request, what I want to do is I want to add a decision element, which is going to be if my travel request is going to be either approved or denied. Now, the person who is going to make this decision regarding the approval of my travel request is going to be the leader of this, the person who started the process. Now, in order for that to happen, the first thing I have to do is create a new lane. And as you can see, it automatically adds it to our process mapping tool. Next thing I'm going to do is I want to change the name of this lane. I don't want it to be a starter because this is now another lane. For this lane, I'm going to name it starters leader or just leader. Another thing that you can see is that our lanes are a little wide, so I also have the option of resizing them. And you can see how easy this is. You know, there's no programming involved, and there's no, special set of skills and codes that you have to enter. Everything in our solutions is all simple, so anyone in your organization can use it. I want my next activity coming after this activity. After I make the request for my travel, my approval process is going to come following this activity. So all I have to do is click here and drag my activity to the lane. Now you also have a couple of options regarding the connections between your activities. So for this example, I'm just going to click here in my options and set it to manual. So I can configure where I want my my lines to go. Now, for this decision, I'm also going to change the title because I don't want it just to have it called decision. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to rename it as approve request. Since this is a decision activity, it's going to have a couple different outputs. For one of my outputs, which is the denial of this request, I'm just going to click here and connect it back to my travel request. Now, once again, I'm going to configure my connectors. I can also click on this request and name it. So in this case, it's going to be my denial. So my request was denied. But on the other hand, if my request is approved, then I'm going to move on ahead so another person can perform the next activity. In this case, it'll be performed, the next activity is going to be performed by my travel management department. So again, I'm going to create a new lane. Let me resize it once again. So once again, let's rename the lane to travel management. The difference is that in this case, I'm going to choose a functional role that is going to perform this activity. So in this case, it's going to be my travel management department. Again, so all this means is that all of the activities that are going to be within this lane, they're all going to be executed by the users within this functional role. So let's add our next activity, which is going to be check the request and schedule reservations. And again, I'll just drag and drop it down here to my travel management. And let's move this connector again, just to make it look, a little bit nicer for the rest of our process. Again, we're going to rename this activity, and like I said, I'm going to call it check request and schedule reservations. There we go. Now again, as we move along in our process, we can change the size of the lane. So as you can see here, it can say, oh, our canvas is pretty full. But that's not a problem because we can just click on one of the lanes and then just resize it as we need it. Okay, so now that this activity here has been concluded, we're going to send the next activity back up to the starter, who, by now, his trip has been authorized and his reservations has been already scheduled. So for the next activity, when the starter returns, he or she is going to have to detail the trip's expenses and, attach any receipts and so on. So this activity here, we're going to just call it detail expenses. Now, after the expenses have been detailed, these expenses, they now have to be approved or they're going to have to be denied. But this time, these expenses are not going to be approved or denied by the starter's leader. So this activity, the next activity, is going to be conducted by the travel management team. So let's once again create a new decision activity, but this time put in the travel management team lane. And this activity, we're going to call it approve or deny expenses, or just approve expenses. And again, for this activity, we're going to have two outputs. One is if the expenses are going to be approved, and the other one is if the expenses are going to be denied. Now, if the expenses are going to be denied, we're just going to simply send it back to the user, to the starter, so he or she can either include more receipts or give more details about the expenses. And once again, let's rename this connection. So this one, the expense report was denied. Okay, so now moving on. For our next activity, I'm going to create a new element, which is going to be a parallel. So what does this mean? All this means is that my next activities, I'm going to have two activities happening at the same time. So let me once again increase the size of my lanes here. And to make it easier, let me zoom out a little bit so you guys can understand it a little bit better. Okay, there we go. Oh, and before I forget, let me rename my connector here, so if my expenses get approved, we'll know where it's going. So for one of my activities, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another swim lane. And this swim lane, I'm going to call it my financial department. And again, just like we did with our other swim lane, I'm going to select who's going to be responsible for the activities in this swim lane. In this case, let's choose our department. And here, the department responsible is going to be the financial department. So, moving back on, so from here, we're going to have an activity that is going to go to our financial department. And this activity is going to be to reimburse the expenses. And now let's say the employee, he got some type of advancement for his travels. And there's some money left over, so he's also going to have to reimburse the company. And let's call it reimburse company. Now, like I said earlier, these two activities, they're going to run parallel to each other. And just for the sake of the example, one of them might not even be necessary. So if the user receives this activity, he can just send it along to the next activity. And again, like I said earlier, these processes, they can vary from company to company. They can have many other business rules and inputs and outputs and so on. Okay, so now moving on, what we have to do now is we're going to have to bring back both of these activities together so we can then move along with our process. So in this case, we'll select here a parallel, but we don't want a parallel. So let's change this to a complex. And again, we'll connect our complex or our other activity to our complex. And then from here, we can just finish our process. Okay, so here now we have our process. As you can see how, simple and easy this was to create. Let me zoom out a little bit here so you can see it better. So from here, let me just, save the process. And here what we can do is evaluate our process to see, if we did anything wrong or there's anything that we need to fix. And in this case, as you can see, we have no errors in our process. So before we move along to execute our process already comes along with a few default features that has already been configured. For example, the executioner for each activity has already been configured according to each lane, but in this case, I want to make an exception for this activity right here. So let me double click here and open the activity data, and I'm going to change here under my configuration and my execution just who is going to execute this activity. So from here, you can see that the executioner is defined by the instance, and it was going to be the process started, but I don't want the process starter. I want the process starter leader to execute this activity. So what does that mean? That just means that regardless who starts this process, who starts this travel request process, the person's leader or the starter's leader, he's going to be the one that is going to be responsible for approving the travel request. Now, let's also add a checklist to this activity just to help out the person who is approving or rejecting this travel request when it comes time to perform this action. And in this case here, let's configure here my travel request checklist. And all this person is going to do is see if there's going to be enough information for him or her to make a decision. And based on that, he's going to either approve it or deny it. Okay, now I'll just save and exit. Now I'm back to my process workflow. And now, thinking about the execution of my process, what I want to do is I want to build a form for this first activity so the person can then fill out a form with details about the travel request. So let's now create a form straight from this activity. Again, I'll just double click on it and then just go to my configuration and forms. So now here we have a couple of options. We can either associate a form that's already, that you previously created. But for this example, I want to create a new form just so I can show you guys how easy it is and how simple it is to do this. So I'll just click here on new, input my ID for my new travel request form, the name. Okay, now let's just click on next because this is a wizard. Here you also have the option of create a new form or using one from a template, but in our case, I want to create a new form. And as for my entity, I'm going to use an entity that I already created before, which is my travel entity. And then let's just go now and click on finish. Now, what you're going to see from our forms, it's very simple to use, and it's exactly like our process model where you just do some drag and drop. So let's start off. I'm going to put in my company's logo. Then I'll add, let's say, a title for my form. And now all I have to do is associate my field. So let's start off with, let's say, an input here. And let's call this one employee's name. And the order which is going to be filled out is going to be the first one. And it's going to be a required field. And choose the attribute name, which is this case is going to be the name of the person. Next, what I'm going to do is I want to know where this person is going. So I want to know the destination of this employee. And I want to know, for example, like I said, the city and the state where this person is going. One of the options that we have here is we can create lists. So the person doesn't have to manually input a text information. He can just select from a drop-down menu. So in this case, let me get here my list of values. And then as you can see, you can, align everything, play around with it without a problem. So for my list of values, this is going to be the state where the person is going. Let me change here the tab order. And I want this to be a required field. And my data source. Oh, before I save, let me add my attribute. Also now, we're going to do the same process to add the name of the city where this person is going. Okay, let me resize it here just to make it look a little bit nicer. And next up, what I want to know is when is the person leaving and when are they coming back? So I can add here my date fields. Lastly, I'm just going to add a open text field. So if the person wants to add any comments about the trip or make any requests, he can do it here on this field. Now, like I've said, we're just creating a very simple example, straightforward, straight to the point. But as you can see here on the left-hand side menu, we have a lot more options. Like you can add layout button, spin out, time, can create grids, buttons, and you can also create field sets to a group, to group information, and so on. I can also from here evaluate my form just like we did with our process, and as we can see, no errors. Once again, let me just save it and we can then just move on. Okay, so now that same form, I want to add it to this approve request. But this time, when it comes to this activity, I don't want the person to be able to make changes to the form. I want the person to only be able to view the form and see what's on it. So now we can just associate that form we just created to this activity. So now we just find our form. And then here, we choose it as read only. Okay, once again, we just save and exit. And that's it for our modeling stage. We have all of our activities, all of our forms, all of our decisions, all of the people who are going to be responsible for making decisions and executing each action. So now we can just go on and move ahead to executing our process. Let me just save here first. To execute it, I'll just move on to our other component, which is our workflow component. So here, what we have is a list of all of the workflows that I'm able to initiate. We have them divided by process types, or you can even set up them as your favorites. So as soon as you come in, you can just click on it and start it. So this is our travel request process. I'm just going to put travel request for training and click on start. Here I have the option if I want to add any description. And again, here we go. We have our form that we just configured a little bit ago. So I'll just fill out the form. My destination. My departure date is going to be from Monday, and I'll be back on the following Friday. Any comments? I'll just add training in Springdale, Connecticut. Okay, so now I filled out my form and I'm ready to send it to the next step, which is going to be, if you guys remember, to approve the request. Now, I'm not going to be able to approve the request, so once I send it forward, my leader is going to have to approve the request or deny it. So what I'll do next, just for the example, I'm going to log in with my leader's login and password so the leader can then approve or deny the request. Now, once my leader signs into his account, he's going to have a to-do task. All he's going to have to do is click here on his pending task menu, go to his workflow, look at the process. So in this case, it was the travel request process, and then execute it. Now here, like we configured earlier, all my leader is going to be able to do is view the form and the information that I put in. So he can see here my name, my destination, my departure, and my comments. So here he has three options. He can either approve my request and send it to the next step, he can deny my request, or he can send it back to the previous step and, let's say, ask for more information and so on. So in this case, we're going to approve the request. But wait a minute. Remember that we said that we had a checklist input to this activity that the person was going to have to fill out before sending to the next step? So let's go ahead and fill out our checklist. And for our checklist, we want to know if there's enough information to approve the request. We'll click here on yes, and then send it to the next step. Okay, just move along with the example. Let's go back to the user that we were using before. Which, by the way, just for this example, he's also a manager of that process. That is, he's the manager of the process that we just created and just executed. So because of that, he can also monitor the process. So to do that, simply go here, back to our workflow solution. And here under management, we have our control panel. And here we can see all of the processes that this user is responsible for. So for example, we can see which processes are on time, which processes are delayed, how many processes are on time, how many are delayed, how many instances are open. And let's say for our travel request process for 2017, we can see that we have one instance running and it's on time. We can also get more information about this process by just clicking here on Open the Activity. And here we can see at what activity this is, where it stopped, who's responsible for this activity, and we can obtain more information about the activity and about the workflow. So for example, if I want to see who is responsible for this activity, where this activity is stopped, I can just click here to view the flow chart, and I can see exactly what's going on with the process and what's happened so far. So for example, I can see that the first stage was executed, the start date, who executed it, just like any other activity, you know, the status, the start date, the executed action, and so on. And here now I can see where my activity is stopped, or where my process stopped, and what activity it stopped at. So here for this activity, I can see that it's under execution, the start date, and who is responsible for the execution of this activity. So in this case, is our travel management functional role. Okay, so what we saw in the video today, like I said in the beginning, was just a very quick and objective process modeling example, okay? It's, we saw its execution, we saw its monitoring using a simple travel request process. It's very important to note that SoftExpert's BPM solution has many advanced resources that I didn't show on the example here today, such as sub-processes, integration with ERP systems, integration with indicators, risks, and a bunch of other elements and functions to map and automate every single type of process, regardless if it's a very simple process like the one we just saw today or a very complex process. So, like I said earlier, the goal of this video was just to show you how easy it can be to map a process using the correct tool.
Thanks to all of you who took part in this webinar. If you have any questions or would like to get in touch with Gus, please email him at gustavo.oliveira@softexpert.com. For more webinars, please visit our website www.softexpert.com. See you next time.